Okay, hello everyone. I cannot see you, but I believe and hope that you can see me. I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are here at a time when our democracy and communities are facing unprecedented challenges. Now more than ever, documentary film plays a vital role in helping us to understand both our present moment and the historical context that brought us here. Today, we're joined by Dawne Langford, Marco Williams, and Soyeon whose work illuminates different paths towards social transformation. Soyeon, I'm sorry if I pronounced your last name wrong. You'll have to correct. Through deeply personal storytelling, their films, located in Los Angeles, Baltimore, and Philadelphia, center on grief and survival following loss, especially in the wake of gun violence, the impact of community trauma across generations, and complex conversations about identity and reconciliation. And I have to say that watching each of these three films was quite an emotional journey for me. And it was such an infusion of hope and that sense of the human spirit. I think each of these filmmakers really approached their work with a level of sincerity and care and optimism that through confronting these really difficult issues, there is a better world that we can create. And it's a world that's not going to come from the top down, but that's going to come from the best efforts of everyday people. So thank you all so much for your beautiful work. Um, my name is Sabaah Folayan. I am a documentary director. My first film, Who Street, centered on the uprising that took place in Ferguson after Mike Brown Jr. was killed. That premiered at Sundance in 2017. My second documentary was called Look at Me, XXXTentacion, which is about a young rapper who passed away in June of 2018 and who was really an icon for a younger generation and was quite a problematic young man. And so the film really looks closely at mental health, at intimate partner violence, at internet culture, just tries to make sense of some of those really complicated issues. And my third feature documentary, Ratified, is about the struggle to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, which would enshrine gender equality in the Constitution, and which has been a mystifyingly difficult effort over the past 100 years. And that film is currently in festivals, so hopefully you can catch it somewhere near you. So Marco Williams is an award-winning filmmaker. He's been nominated 3 times for the Sundance Film Festival Grand Jury Prize. He spent his entire career exploring the question of injustice worldwide. He's a filmmaker whose films unmask the complexities of the human condition. A reviewer of his films opined, "You make films about the stories we prefer to keep hidden." And I think that's very true of his most recent film, Murders That Matter, which premiered on POV in 2023. So Yeon is a Korean American director and producer from Los Angeles. Her debut feature film, which extremely powerful debut, So Yeon, Liquor Store Dreams, is a heartfelt exploration of the second generation Korean American children of LA liquor store owners, which premiered on POV. And I think it's hard to really describe the nuance and the courage of that film's approach, because it also tackles the really complicated relationship between Korean Americans and African Americans and the historical tensions there, which I thought was really exceptional. So Yeon is a 2022-2023 BAFTA Breakthrough USA participant, a 2021 CAM Fellowship alum, and a recipient of both the Sundance Uprise Grant and the Sundance Institute Documentary Film Program Grant. She is also an Armed with the Camera Fellow through Visual Communications. And last but absolutely not least, we have Dawne Langford, who is a 2023 Sundance Women to Watch Adobe X Fellow, and 2022-23 Sundance Producers Lab Fellow. She worked for years as a broadcast television editor, so you know her timelines are tight. And she produced independent feature documentaries, including Check It, Kandahar Journals, Finding Joseph I, and the Body Politic, which is part of POV's 37th season on PBS. So welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being here. So before we recognize the partners, is there anything that any of the panelists would like to share about yourselves that you feel like folks should know? Well, we'll have more time for you guys to dive into all that stuff. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners for co-presenting today's conversation. So thank you to WNET, Preserving Documentary, Black Public Media, Color Congress, CAM, the Center for Asian American Media, and Firelight. So let's dive into talking about these films. I'm going to toss it to you first, Dawne, to talk about your approach to the film is very, very cinematic. There was something in the structure of the film that kind of reminded me of a narrative structure. You have this young man he becomes the mayor of Baltimore. That was the first sort of unexpected turn. And then he's fighting to institute policies that are going to tackle gun violence at the root. Can you talk about the process of documenting that? How much did you know about what was going to happen going into that, and sort of what was your intention for the storytelling? Because this is such a big issue, and it can be very easy to take sort of a snapshot of a moment like this and not try to like track a solution. So talk about that creative decision a little bit.
Sure. Well, it doesn't hurt to have a first-time director who spent over 25 years as a cinema verite documentary DP. So that is a really great foundation to start out with, which is why it's cinematic. Part of that approach, though, also is to show a Baltimore that we know, that people who've lived in Baltimore, who have family in Baltimore, who are still currently living in Baltimore, how beautiful it actually is, and that it's very commonly mined for images of trauma, of suffering, of poverty. So that was a very conscious decision to show that beauty of the city. But also, we had no idea what was going to happen. Initially, the film was planned to be somewhat of an election film, so sort of like a street fight, but in Baltimore, because there were so many colorful characters that were running for mayor. Some of them previously disgraced mayors who had embezzled funds, like controversial DAs, like just like a really interesting crop of people. But it turned out that the real story was more about what they were doing, what Brendan Scott did to sort of lead the change of how violence is tackled in Baltimore, and presenting a solution that would be more in the public health sphere and human centered and trauma informed, and like that's how we can really take care of each other. And we had no idea it was going to turn out that way. So over 700 hours of footage are is what we had to sort through, and figuring out all of these different themes that were coming out, what was important, what was supported by the material, what was a scene. When you're shooting verite, you don't always have the time to get everything that fleshes out what would be a scene. So yeah, I don't know if I'm actually answering your question, but sort of trying. Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely answering it. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is this was a very simple and brief filmmaking process. No, I'm kidding.
Yes. Yeah, just, just turn the camera on and go.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's really impressive, and I think it just speaks to the commitment that documentary filmmakers make when we launch into these projects. Speaking about that sort of, disgraced political candidate, Marco, your film follows a woman who we start out the film learning that she's been accused of stealing a significant sum of money, and then the narrative goes on to sort of complicate that story and expand on what actually happens. And we see how this little moment has been used to represent this woman who is so deeply complex and who ultimately well, I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but things are not as they appear. I will say that. So Marco, can you talk about, working with this complex character? Did you have your own questions and concerns about your main participant, and how did you think about bringing the audience onto her side, which she so clearly allowed us to kind of be with her nuances and her complexities?
Um, it, Similar to Dawn, I would say, I began this project filming in 2016, thinking that it was going to be an election film. And upon losing the election, or not even getting to be, yeah, losing her election, Movita Johnson Harrell, I then realized that the film was more than an election film, more than a film about an individual trying to address violence in the city of Philadelphia, that it really was a film about trauma.
Synopsis. I want to make sure anyone who hasn't seen it knows who
Absolutely.
Movita is.
Murders That Matter is a film that follows over the course of 6 years the effort of Movita Johnson Harrell, who is a African American Muslim woman, mother, who seeks to redress, find solutions to gun violence, particularly in black and brown communities in Philadelphia, all spurred by the murder of her youngest son in 2011. And I will say that the impulse for this film grew out of my feeling that America and Americans did not respond to the crisis, the mass killings in our communities, uh, in the same way that they did if it was a police officer or law enforcement shooting black and brown people. And so I met Movita, a Black Lives Matter candidate in 2016, and followed her, just me, and thought she was going to win an election. And I thought this was going to be really uplifting. And she lost an election. And it was at that moment two things occurred. I didn't want to end a film about loss with a loss. And I was then I had a better insight into Movita as somebody who was carrying generations of trauma, and then understood the film was as much about an effort to address gun violence as it was about how people try to heal as a result of traumatic incidents. And so, just to answer your question, I spent a lot of time with Movita, and I was very curious always how she managed to do things economically, but it almost didn't matter. She was just doing stuff, and that in the end, the idea that she was indicted for fraud was not really what the film was about, and in fact was erroneous. And it was Josh Shapiro, who was at the time the Attorney General of the state of Philadelphia, who targeted her in many ways. And I then made a decision that I would allow the audience to be judge and jury by starting with the indictment and then learning her story. One of my favorite ways of structuring a film: start in the present, go back, bring us back to that moment, and go forward. So that's the kind of the journey that I took, 6+ years of following Movita uh, as she tried to make a difference and as she tries to heal from her own personal trauma.
Thank you. That's such important work, and I think showing also that African American Muslim community in Philadelphia is such a very specific group that I think we very rarely see represented on screen or in culture in general. Um, so, Yan, your work, I think, shares with these two films a real focus on intergenerational trauma, intergenerational relationships, the way that loss can permeate across generations. So, my question for you is: are you and Danny getting married? No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. It's see the film. It's like the running.
I feel like that's one of the most asked questions. But Danny's really like he's one of my really good friends. So no, he also has this amazing fiance. So
Sorry,
yeah, I'm always like,
no, I'm sorry. I couldn't resist that joke, but that is absolutely not what this Q&A is about. Um, for me, as a Los Angeles native and as a Black person, from the opening shot of the film, there was this jolt of familiarity, and then as you started to introduce the topics you were going to follow, I could feel myself sort of tensing up because it was sort of like, where is this going? And this is not a conversation that we have out loud. It's not a conversation that we have in mixed company. And by the end of the film, I was totally disarmed and frankly a mess because of just how deeply moving it was and what a privilege it was to see some of these moments. And I think your choice to turn the camera on your friends and your family and the people closest to you just was such a generous choice on your behalf and on their behalf, because we don't get to see this level of intimacy. So talk about where the idea for this film came from and
mhm.
what that process was like.
Wow. As a first time filmmaker, I think for me, I just wanted to make a film. And because I wanted to make a film that is within my own knowledge, I kind of was, I always knew that the liquor store was a special place. And because so many Korean American second gen children grew up in liquor stores, I was like, there's a story here. I just don't know what it is yet. And so as I was filming, I honestly thought it'd be a very simple story, just like about our history, tying to the LA uprisings in 92. And I didn't think anything really of it. But I think once 2020 hit and George Floyd's death, like really I think it obviously challenged all of Americans, but I think particularly within my own family and within the Asian American community, we do grapple with a lot of anti-Blackness. So this is something that I was like, well, I'm already making a movie. And if I kind of don't address the elephant in the room, like, why am I even making this? And so that was a really big moment for me where I I kind of had to dig deep. I was like, okay, what do I want to say? And as somebody who loves films and wants to make films and am making films, like I don't want to make a film that somebody else made. And I want to make something that is very, very truthful to me and my community and kind of shows us in our own light without um, the other gaze, right? And so I think I just want it to be as authentic as possible without any shame. And as a result, I think a lot of the questions, there's a really big fight that me and my dad have in the middle of the film. And it's a fight that probably nobody will want to see on screen. It's always private conversations we have. And so for me, I think the question I always get is like, how did you get your dad to open up or even say some stuff? Because he says a lot of things. And so for me, and for my dad doesn't think he said anything wrong. He feels like he's living in his truth, which to me, as a filmmaker, I think there's, we fought for like 20 plus minutes. I'm not going to show 20 minutes of us fighting, but I think for us, I wanted to kind of show his perspective as well as countering with mine and showing him, hey, there's two sides to this conversation and two different generations. And for us, the whole point of the film was like, how do we get a little bit closer and have a little bit more understanding? And so I think it was important for me to kind of go to that scary place, even if it might have shown me or him in a bad light.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I think it was one of those moments that's just human, right? And I think we know that, in some cultural spaces, there's this need to feel like we can be 100% correct and we can have the right view and say the right words. But I think the truth of the matter is it sort of dissolves and gets really, really messy when we get into our own homes and our own communities. And I think this film is such a valuable model for how you can engage that and you can not let people off the hook, but you also just have to sort of be with the reality that you have to coexist with people and you can't just transform someone's entire life experience with a conversation, however right you may be. I think that's really important sort of emotional intelligence for the times that we're living in. So I want to ask each of you the question of impact. Were you thinking about impact the legacy of political struggle? Were you thinking of your films as tools to help move us from one historical context to another? And if so, can you just sort of describe your hopes for how your filmmaking ties into those ideas?
I can go first just to keep the order. Impact was something that wasn't really thought about, I think, until the story emerged, and that this is a possibility of modeling what that change looks like, and that you can't say that it can't be done anymore because you can see that it can be done, and you can see the steps that it requires. Not saying that it's cut and dry, but I think that the impact is something that came about after crafting the story. Um, and that there are definitely many hopes that we can continue that, and to share the film in community. It's more powerful to see it with people. We've had violence interrupters come and see it, and it's really satisfying that they feel so strongly and are so happy about the representation and seeing what they do on the big screen, because it is undervalued, it's underpaid. I mean, it's out of the love for community, but it's not an easy thing to do. Um, so I think that that was something unexpected regarding the impact possibilities. And we're, POV is really wonderful. They have some resources where we can take the film to other cities that are similarly impacted by gun violence, or just the trauma of either being not invested in or de-invested from. So yeah, we just have hopes that that will continue. And I'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Marco, same question for you.
Yeah, I apologize to those of you out there, but I'm going to say that impact and whether a film can be transformative, I have uncertainty about. And this is making lots of films that I have utilized in the context of outreach and impact. And so while I wished for this film to be a catalyst for conversations and of impact, Murders That Matter is very complicated, as you've noted. It starts with somebody who is indicted for something, so it's not about a straightforward hero or heroine. Um, and a lot of times, audiences and people get very caught up in guilt or innocence and lose sight of trauma. And not that trauma is an excuse for committing a crime or an alleged crime, but, and there's always a but, I think, it the principal participant of the film is a fierce advocate towards the addressing gun violence in her community. And so Movida has made great use of the film, principally showing it to young African American men, um, to help them to kind of reflect on cost, emotional consequence, loss. Um, and the last thing I'll say, though, is that where the film has had the greatest impact is when it's been shared with communities of people who have also lost a loved one. And what I had to learn in such a screening or screenings is that just showing the film without there being someone to mediate, a healthcare person, uh, risks re-traumatization of those who've lost a loved one. So this has made the pathway for impact with the film both exciting because it's more than just show the film, but also not without challenge because there is a cost for those who watch this film. They tend to relive their own trauma, and many times, have a catharsis, but there's still a cost or a challenge emotionally.
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually initially made Liquor Store Dreams for educational purposes. I wanted the film to be shown at colleges, universities, everywhere, just because I felt like we don't normally see Asian Americans as politically active, and I wanted to show a different narrative that we as I guess a privileged demographic where we can exist in this world and not have quote unquote politics interfere, but in reality, politics do interfere with our lives. And so for me, we had like a really robust impact campaign that PBS also helped us with. That I wanted to engage Asian Americans to be more politically active because I wanted them to have the tools to be able to confront it in day to day life. I think so much of our community, they feel very helpless or ignored, or they feel like, you know what, that's like not my struggle. But they don't realize that it is their struggle, and that if you are not prepared for it, there will be consequences. And so for us, if you go to our website, liquorstoredreams.com, we've created like zines, we've created a lot of pamphlets translated in Korean and English and different languages, so people can understand and really dismantle and even like their own anti-blackness within their own community. How do they create change just as regular human beings? I think in this age of um, internet culture and like celebrity documentaries and praise, I think that a lot of individual and regular people think that they have no agency and power. And so for me, I really wanted to empower people to create change on their own individual level, whether it's talking to their parents or just talking to their friends or just within their community, because I think that's where change starts first.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that is super powerful, and I think um, I really resonated with each of the films so much, and I resonate with what you said, Marco, about the impacts of these films. I think there are ripple effects that we don't always know and understand. Um, I want to get a little bit more sort of granular and talk about the impact and your relationships with the people in your films. What were some of the ethical considerations? Was there sort of a code of conduct? Did you have any intention in mind in terms of how you wanted them to feel after the film? So, Yan, you show your father the film and then film his reaction to it, which is a really interesting choice. But I'm curious if you guys could speak to the sort of like just internal impacts of the film on the people who participated in the process.
I don't know if I can speak for anyone else, but I have noticed that well, we generally when we screen, either Erica Bridgeford is there or Dante Johnson. The mayor, he appears sometimes, um, and it's been an incredibly empowering process. I think that they're all used to being leaders and they know how to use platforms, and it hasn't been overwhelming. So I think that we're just maybe positioned differently that way, where it's not like no one is new to being somewhat in the limelight that we feature. So I can't really say how it's changed them. I have noticed that it's when people come to specifically address them and how they resonate deeply with them, or how they felt something unlocked in their own subconscious after having someone else's story shared. So I've witnessed that. I feel like everyone had a lot of agency. We didn't film anything that no one wanted to have filmed. I do get concerned sometimes for Erica or Dante watching it, but they watch it over and over again, and it's just sort of like remember, like, there's a lot of loss in our film. And so, I think we all know that how sometimes when you're mourning, it hits you at different times. So I have had members of the audience or friends come to see the film who who I feel need care after, and I'm not, and I haven't figured that out yet, where it's emotionally unlocking for other people, and we don't have any resources right now to address that, and maybe it's a good thing that whatever that is that's so tight gets loosened up, but how I'm not sure how to move forward with that yet. So I'm happy that you asked that question.
Yeah, thank you. And Marco, yeah, so you touched a little bit on the re-traumatization piece. Can you talk about, the kind of initial, at what point did you screen the film for folks? And then maybe you can share a little bit more about how you were able to create those support systems for your screenings.
Um, you, I was. This is a deeply personal story for me. I was. I have two family members who were murdered in West Philly, in the community that Movita runs for office and lives. And on face value, that made me an insider, and therefore shared experience with Movita in particular. And so I'm going to answer your question, but I think there's an importance to the journey. And yet, Movita and I have differences, and one of the bridges that I had to traverse is that I'm not a Muslim man, and Movita is a Muslim woman, and very outward, very public, but also there were boundaries and concerns by her husband in terms of what I had access to, and I just very briefly. Uh, Movita, when she works at the district attorney's office, is the best dressed public servant of all time. Every day, her kimar, her shoes, her pumps, her flats, everything really beautiful. And I said, I got to see your closet. Filmmaker, I got to see your closet. You got to show me your closet. Well, Movita allowed me up into her closet, which was a room that she made into a closet. And then her husband comes home. What am I doing on the third floor of their house? All right, so there was and so in some ways, maybe a 6-year film allowed for little by little that Yancey came to consider me a brother and a member of the family. Where does that matter? Has one, other asset is that Movita is a qualified social worker. So, despite her own traumas, whenever we have screened the film, she is also equipped to help people work through their trauma. Although sometimes gets very deeply re-traumatized in the course of screenings. But that's just, I didn't realize this. I didn't imagine this. I didn't frame it. I discovered this. And so I think that uh, I have had a journey, personal journey as a filmmaker, of being very committed to trying to get to a place with the participants where they reveal something deeply personal, something really, uh, in some ways, ultimately re-traumatizing. In my film, The Undocumented, the son finally realizes that he's never going to see his father again. He had to died in the desert, and he's crying, 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 and I'm there like this, like this, like this. Great, great, great. And now I've come to a place where I am wary of those moments in film. I want to reconnect with the humanity. I want to put the camera down, hug the person, be available to them. So these are tensions that I'm experiencing as a filmmaker in the filmmaking process, that I think I just wish to share, that precedes uh, what happens afterwards. And so these are, I guess I'm not answering it directly, but I'm highlighting things that I'm contend with as a filmmaker to get at the deeply personal, which I ultimately feel is the where the politics really lie.
Thank you. No, that's really great. Um, I think it just speaks to the difference when you're a part of a community and when you're there and you're not going anywhere versus trying to go in and get a story. And I think, you know, as independent filmmakers, I think more so than maybe other sectors of our field, our work is as much about our relationship to our work as it is about the final product. And I think that's really, really important. Especially, I think, in your case, Soyeon, which this is about your family and your life. So can you speak to kind of how did you come to the decision to include your father's reactions and the other folks in the film? How did they receive it and receive their experience being in
Mhm. Yeah, I was quite scared just because the one of the reasons why my parents allowed me to film everything was because they didn't think it was going to be anything. They were like, film whatever you want. It's not like it's going to be, we went worldwide. And so I think for us, we're like, they almost had no expectations. So I just kept filming day in, day out. And Danny is somebody I knew for many, many years. And his family was so generous for to let me film them and have them open up to me. I think the first time that I even filmed with his mom was so open and telling me their family secrets. And I was like, wow, I feel very touched. And as somebody who is a personal friend, and obviously I'm making a story about my family, like I do have a huge sense as a daughter, as well as a friend, as well as a filmmaker, to take care of my subjects. And so I tried to be as um, I guess critical, but also just take care and have show the bigger picture. And so I think there was a point where I said, don't say anything, just watch the full thing, because so often you might be like, but this and this and this, but you also are watching a film, and we are also taking you on a journey. And I think that in a sense, regular people like my dad aren't thinking about story structure and why I'm showing certain things here and there. And so I think when I first showed both of them, I said, don't say anything till the very, very end. Even a lot of Danny's family had a lot of concerns. They're like, well, what if I don't want it shown to everybody? And I'm like, well, we didn't work 3 years for something like this. I think that we always tried to preface to them, we don't know where the film will go. We don't know how many people will end up watching it at the very end. But if there's anything that you have concerns with, just let us know. But watch the full thing first. And after they watched everything, they were like, oh, okay, I totally get it now. Like, I had so much fear because I didn't know what was going to be shown. But now that I saw the full context, I, I understand, and they love it. They watch it almost more than me now, and they go to a lot of the Q&As. My dad loves it. But also, there are regular people who obviously aren't media trained. They haven't, they're not used to public speaking. And so for me, I always, even at Q&As, I always like to preface to them, if there's questions you don't want to know or you just don't know, you don't need to answer them. You don't need to say anything. And because outside of their lives continue, whereas for me, I made the film, I get to in a sense move on, but this is also their lives. So
Thank you. Yeah. So one of our partners, Color Congress, I think about the work of Sonia Childress, and I always think about this essay that she wrote years ago now about the idea of documentary as this empathy machine, and the idea that, or the sort of implication that we are making documentaries in order to give white audiences a window into the lives and worlds of people of color so that they can finally feel enough empathy to sort of take action. And I think that, we may, in a sense, be further along and we may not. And so I'm just curious. And I think that conversation can be particularly salient when it comes to fundraising and when it comes to getting the resources to make a film and sort of explaining or justifying what this film is going to do in the world. So I'm curious if you could speak to, is that a tension that you felt you contended with? Is it not a tension that you contended with? And how was the process of actually putting these films together?
I can go first again, I guess. I feel like that burden of having to prove humanity is something that definitely needs to be dismantled. And that for us to continue in a position where we have to be validated by whoever the power structures, I feel like that is the opposite of what I would want to do in my work, for sure. I do think that understanding that there's a universality of complex realities, and uh, the power structure being how it is, that's just going to be there. Um, so I do feel like navigating through this process, um, that there are other elements that people experience through an access point. And so you can sort of identify with whoever a main protagonist is, regardless of how you identify, and maybe feel like you're going through the same things, which is such a beautiful thing. And I mean, that's one of my favorite parts of doing this kind of work and what drives me to this work. But it's interesting because the power dynamics of what you describe are something that I don't want to participate in even, but it's there. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, Dawn. It's the same question to you, Marco.
Well, just to sort of really take the thread from Dawn, it is there, and I'm thinking about the writing that you reference, Sabaah, that Sonia did. The core application has 4 or 5 different things that are intended to ensure that we are not the filmmakers are not what's the term, dropping in, appropriating other people's stories, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, they take on to me, those questions also have the quality of having to justify and rationalize one story for, I'm not going to simply say, white gatekeepers, but the gatekeeper of the power structure unto itself. So it's a curious dynamic that you have to kind of still rationalize and justify your access, which is in its own way kind of meaning that you have to explain the validity of your storytelling. And so, and I had to do this, of course, in applications with Murders That Matter, and would always take the approach of, well, we don't see Muslim Americans on screen all the time. Sometimes I just wanted to go like that. It's like, really, do I have to explain to you that this community, it's like Soyeon saying, that, Asian Americans are not seen in a particular way, so we have to kind of justify. So you can hear a little bit of tension and frustration in my voice, because I wish that I could get to the place where it's simply, this is a story, this is a person, this is an experience that has validity. And yes, while I think it's important to make sure that I'm not extracting or parachuting in, how can I move past that so that you can at least accept the validity of this individual, this community, this storyteller. And so it frustrates me, and I think we still have some ways to go before maybe we arrive at what that sweet spot is. And it probably will occur when there are more of us making the films, and there are more of us as the gatekeepers, and we don't have to explain, because the people who are receiving the proposals, the pitches, etc., know the community, and they look at us and they know our relationship to the community. So I hope that's not a downer, but that's kind of my visceral kind of feeling about this part of the work that we are asked to do.
Yeah, I mean, we're all truth tellers. I think that's why we're here. So that's what we have to do. So yeah, What are your thoughts about? I think one of the things that particularly struck me was the absence of a white sort of gaze within your film, but in terms of the making of it, and what were your intentions around that?
Frankly, I don't make stuff for white people. I really make it for me and my family and my community. So I think that was the first thing that I wanted to do. I only want to make a film that, like, if somebody from the Korean community watches it, they'll completely understand. And so that was my only goal. And I think that through its specificity, like, I hoped that then other people would be able to understand that, because it would end up being universal. And so I think that I didn't really think about anybody else, to be honest. And I think that really helped me, just because it helped me focus on what is the story here, whose POV is it. I think the struggle with being a documentarian is that you have to almost prove yourself. Like, my story is worthy. That I, I I don't. I think that's the thing that I hate, that I have to justify my story, my existence, in order to get funding. But I think one of the most powerful thing is that, hey, you should support us because it's never been seen. Because on the flip side, that you'll never see it from this specific perspective, and that's more worthy than anything else. But also, I mean, who knows? If I'm on the other side and also judging, I might think differently. But for the time being, um, I I can only make films on my own terms, and for the people that get it. If other people don't get it, I that's kind of out of my control. The only thing as a filmmaker that I have a duty is that, whether it is whether my film focuses on a specific community, that everybody will be able to still understand and appreciate and have empathy with the story, regardless if they are from the Korean community or not. And so I'm really happy that, I always thought this was a very LA Korean movie, and yet we were able to reach so many different audiences, and that makes me really, really proud that a lot of people, regardless of gender, race, anything, that they are still able to understand our story.
Thank you. So we are getting close to our time. I'm going to toss you guys one last question, and it's going to be a big question, so we will definitely leave this open ended. Um, so I think that there's a tension in the work. Like, we talk about films that are cinematic, and when we're saying cinematic, I think we're implying something about the visual language. We're implying something about an artistic feeling. And I saw that in all of your films. I saw sort of nods toward fiction filmmaking, nods toward photography, and then there's this idea of our democracy is in peril. And we're having a collective crisis in our society, and we need to put this fire out in some way, shape, or form. And I think, there's this idea, and Marco, you talked about being suspicious of this idea that film can be this sort of tool, this utilitarian effort to shape or improve or heal or fix. And so, as you guys, and I want to ask you guys to sort of look forward, and you don't have to give, any type of elevator pitch, but as you're thinking about your work and you're thinking about your body of work moving forward, how are you striking the balance, or are you thinking of yourself as an artist? Are you thinking of yourself as a cultural change worker? Are you thinking of your work as self-expression, or is it a tool or a combination?
Um, I feel like I'm gonna dive even deeper and stay in my direction. And the best thing that I can do, and while we are facing so much peril, is to live as authentically as I can, and to lean into my expression. And so, yes, I think very much leaning into being an artist right now is more important than ever. Um, that being said, I don't know what I might do if I'm really under duress. So we'll see. But it's the beauty of sharing this experience with people here, with people that we all love. I think that this is going to be a really interesting opportunity as well for us to become stronger together, I think that we're going to be able to understand that these forces are working against us collectively, as opposed to, oh, it's just them for now. I think that we have an opportunity here to maybe unite more than we ever have. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dawne.
I'm at a point where what's the most important thing to me is the work to create. I feel very fortunate that what I care about creating is speaks to social justice, social movements, injustice. Um, so I just know that as whatever I'm going to do, probably will not be screened on Netflix because it will not be celebrity driven. But I just want to make stuff, and so I'm really driven by. One of Sweet Honey and the Rock's song "We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot Rest," Ella's song, and that's really what governs me whenever I'm, um, at my lowest. I can't sing, but I sing that first, stanza: "We who believe in freedom cannot rest." I guess I have one other way that I hope to kind of be in a continual engagement with our democracy, and that is that I'm a film educator and I teach filmmaking and I teach documentary practice principally, but also fiction. And I try my best to infuse and imbue the classroom with these values, trying to be the best farmer that I can, plant the seed, germinate it, and hope that it blooms and blossoms. I may not be there for the harvest. I mean, I don't get to say exactly what the those creators are going to create, but I certainly give it all I can to, infuse that. We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
That's beautiful, Marco. Thank you. And so yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I hope to continue make a lot of films that really with a lot of challenging topics that challenge not just myself but my own community, and I want to be able to make being politically active a little bit like more accessible. I think people get very fearful of what it means to be politically active, and to me, I'm like, it could be as simple as just tweeting or mutual aid or just donating to your favorite charity. And so I think so much of, especially our future and the crumbling of democracy, I think we're going to need art so much more. And I hope that we keep doing what we do. And it's going to be hard, but I think that's why we need it so much.
thank you. Well, thank you guys so much for this really, really wonderful conversation. There's so much more that we could obviously say on the topic. Thank you to all of those who watched. If you haven't seen these films, go and see them. Thank you to our co-presenters. Today's conversation is brought to you by POV, which is television's longest running showcase for independent nonfiction films. It's known for its intimate, unforgettable storytelling. POV highlights timely stories that put a human face on pressing issues. Now, in its 37th season, POV continues to inspire and engage audiences on PBS. So, catch the latest films and explore the power of documentary storytelling. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sabaah. That was really wonderful. So, Young, Dawn, really great. Really very moved by each of you.
Same. Thank you,
Same
everybody.
here. Love meeting